Hey, what's up, guys? That's right, it's me, Darth Matu, and I am back. I am sorry for my long absence. I know I've been away, but I hit some life stuff that really threw me for a loop. I won't go too much into details to bore you guys, but it took me a while to get my bearings back, and I'm slowly doing that, which puts me right here in front of this microphone. Today, we're going to be diving back into History of the Force. I know that it's been a long time, and again, I'm really sorry for that, guys. But we're gonna start right where we left off, at the beginning of the rebellion. I suppose that means we're about halfway through the entire Star Wars timeline? Exciting, I know, but we still got a lot to cover. So, without further ado, let's begin.
So many of your fellow Sith look down upon the petty rebellions which inevitably challenge their rule. They see them as insolent, troublesome pests to be crushed and removed. But we know better, don't we, my apprentice? We should not sneer at challenge but welcome it. The struggle of maintaining our rule, the very thing which fuels our power. Darth Sidious failed to understand this. He treated the rebels as upstarts, not worthy of respect. He did not realize until it was too late that the test of strength often lies rooted in rebellion.
Excerpt from Darth Matu's Holocron. The rebellion was something which had been festering in the galaxy even before Palpatine took power. Most people look at his rise as something that went off without a hitch, and for the most part, his plan did unfold perfectly. But the galaxy was not blind. Many senators became increasingly concerned by the increases in Palpatine's power and some of his actions during the war. We touched on this briefly during the last video on imperialization and the reconquest of the Rim, but the senators who resisted Palpatine's rule were known as the Delegation of 2000. These 2000 were some of the staunchest, fiercest supporters of democracy, and they were real threats to Palpatine's early rule. Some of these senators included Bail Organa, Padme Amidala, Jar Jar Binks, Garm Belibis, and Mon Mothma. However, they were too slow to act. They created the Petition of 2000 towards the end of the Clone Wars, and this petition was meant to get Palpatine to promise to lay his power down when the war ended. However, at that point, things had already gone way too far. Palpatine was under no legal obligation to lay his power down, and at that point, he was essentially already a dictator. The petition ended up being completely ineffectual, and it really only served to inform Palpatine of who his enemies were. The new Emperor heralded the start of his new order by arresting 63 of the most potent and public members of the delegation and charging them with sedition and treason. Most of the delegation was shattered in the wake of this arrest. The event sent a very clear message to the rest of the galaxy. The Emperor was not to be opposed. This heavy-handed approach may have helped the Emperor cement his reign in the short term, but it was far from the end of his troubles. Indeed, during the reconquest of the Rim, we talked about how Darth Vader, most especially, perpetuated atrocity after atrocity, and crimes like that only further convinced figures like Bail Organa, Garm Belibis, and Mon Mothma that they had been right to be concerned about Palpatine's rise to power. Acts of rebellious subterfuge began to break out even while the reconquest was still underway. Those members of the delegation that weren't arrested in Palpatine's purged became figureheads around which resistance could be formed. There were dozens of individual rebel cells fighting local conflicts by 18 BBY, even in the face of the growing Imperial war machine. With that said, there were three figures which stood out above everyone else, and they were the three that I just mentioned: Mon Mothma, Garm Belibis, and Bail Organa. These three would eventually rise to lead the Rebel Alliance, though that road was very long and torturous. Mon Mothma was an astute stateswoman and a most able politician. She was probably the most outspoken of the leading trio, and she made no attempts to hide her resistance to Palpatine's rule, taking an ideological stance very early on. She was a senator from Chandrila, and she used her position for years to oppose Palpatine's policies. She even tried to introduce several policies of her own, which would erode Imperial power. Over the years, she kind of became the face of resistance to the New Order, and Palpatine finally snapped and ordered her arrest in 3 BBY. This would force Mon Mothma to go on the run, slipping into hiding and becoming the face of the rebellion full-time. Eventually, she would take up the position of the rebellion's chief of state, and this would allow her to be elected to that same position once the rebellion transitioned into the New Republic. But we'll get to that in another video. The most fierce of the Leader 3 was Garm Belabis, and he was a senator from Corellia. He was also opposed to Palpatine from the get-go. I mean, you know how Corellians are. They never saw a rebellion they didn't like. But in all seriousness, when Belabis returned to Corellia after the arrest of some of the members of the delegation of 2000, he immediately set up the Corellian Resistance, one of the oldest rebellion cells in the galaxy. He would maintain his position as senator for as long as possible and try to hide his opposition to Palpatine's rule so that he could use his political office to fight back against the system from within. He had to play a game of subterfuge, trying to obfuscate his connections to the Resistance while also not supporting Palpatine to the extent that he actually helped the Emperor. This was easier said than done for Garm. Garm was a brilliant strategist and an unparalleled battlefield technician, but he had the personality of a sledgehammer, and about as much guile. His rebellious tendencies came to light, and like Mon Mothma, he would have to go underground, avoiding galaxy-wide Imperial manhunts as he continued to fight back against the Emperor's rule. Bail Organa was the senator from Alderaan, and he was also the monarch of that same planet. He was an extremely educated and peaceful man, but he was also one of the staunchest enemies of the New Order. He was easily the most influential of the Big Three as the ruler of one of the Republic's founding planets. But despite this, Bail managed to hide his opposition to the Emperor. He certainly kept his true loyalties hidden longer than any of the others. Indeed, in the public eye, he was one of the most loyal senators, and he was very well loved by the public as a result, even supporters of Emperor Palpatine. Behind the scenes, however, Organa was using his influence, much like Belabis was, to fight the system from within. He did not outright start his own resistance movement like Belabis did, but he did allow Alderaan to aid others, feeding them covert information or sending them supplies. Bail Organa's true loyalties, just like the others, would eventually be uncovered, however, and in 0 BBY, he was killed when Alderaan was destroyed to test the new Death Star. But that moment was still years away in 2 BBY. By then, rebellion had taken root across the galaxy, though at this point they were still made up of disparate individual cells that were fighting independent wars. They were throwing themselves against the might of the Empire without any real hope of victory. Both Belabis and Organa realized that they couldn't continue this way, that no single movement could topple the Emperor alone, so they began to set up regular meetings between different rebel cells, helping to coordinate their strikes. Most military operations undertaken by the rebels in 2 BBY were entirely local and lacked any kind of cohesive military vision. The cells were able to communicate, but they were not yet fighting together, pretty much just sharing intel and doing their best to coordinate. Maybe occasionally they would trade resources like weapons. All of this would change, however, by the end of that year, with the aid of one Galen Merrick. Galen was an incredibly powerful, Force-sensitive individual who was discovered as a young child hiding on Kashyyyk during the Empire's invasion of the planet at the hands of Darth Vader. We covered that invasion in our last video. I'll do my best to remember to link it in the description, but during this battle, Vader claimed the child and then hid him away as a secret apprentice, training him in the ways of the Force and in the ways of the Sith. Galen would eventually come of age and near the completion of his Sith training. He would be dispatched on a secret mission by his master, a mission to find the disparate rebellious elements in the galaxy and bring them together into one organization so that they could be crushed in one fell swoop. Galen would manage to convince Mon Mothma, Belibis, and Bail Organa to a meeting where they decided to form the Rebel Alliance to restore the Republic, officially unifying the independent cells into one cohesive military force. However, the meeting was a part of Vader's plan, and the Empire struck, capturing the erstwhile leaders of the rebellion and all of Palpatine's most dangerous enemies. That would have been the end of it, but Galen Marek had grown over the course of his journey through the galaxy. He no longer accepted Vader's teachings, and instead fought to free the rebel leaders, eventually sacrificing his life in a battle against the Emperor himself so that they could escape. The Alliance would adopt Galen's family emblem, the Starhawk, as their symbol in his honor, and the First Galactic Civil War had officially begun. This didn't mean that things were suddenly rosy, however. Palpatine's rule had been harsh, and many worlds in the Outer Rim responded to the declaration of rebellion by openly joining the movement. On paper, this was great, but in practice, it simply gave Palpatine hard targets to strike back against, and world after world fell. They were ravished for daring to support the rebellion, while meanwhile, Mon Mothma, Garm Belibis, and Bail Organa had trouble agreeing on a course of action. Mothma thought they needed to wait and grow their strength, while Belibis called for immediate action and the launching of active strikes against the Empire. Organa acted as a mediator between the two, and the rebellion slowly began to find its feet. They began to realize that fighting the Empire in a straight-up military conflict was a fight that they could never win, and they began to shift to hit-and-run guerrilla tactics under the tutelage of Belibis. These tactics were very effective, and the rebellion began to see some success by 1 BBY, closing the year with a raid against Kamino itself. This hit on the Empire's primary cloning facility caused them to finally take the Alliance seriously, and they began to alter their military doctrine, moving away from clones and beginning to adopt more regular recruits. The end of 1 BBY also saw Operation Domino planned and launched. Operation Domino was supposed to be a simultaneous rebellion on worlds across the galaxy, with the idea being that local populations could rise up, toss out their Imperial garrisons, and then set up defensive postures using their planetary shields. The operation was almost a complete disaster, however. Nearly every single uprising was crushed by the Imperials, proving yet again that the rebellion simply could not directly compete with the Empire in a straight-up military fight. The one success of Operation Domino was the liberation of Dock, the homeworld of the Quarrens and the Mon Calamari. The inhabitants of Dock successfully managed to oust their Imperial overlords, mining all approaches to their system with magnetic anti-ship mines, and then declaring themselves for the rebellion. This moment, while the only victory of the entire operation, was still extremely significant, because the Mon Calamari would produce heavy ships for the rebellion for the duration of the war. In many ways, this one change made Operation Domino worth it, because Mon Calamari battlecruisers would become the backbone of the Alliance fleets, and it would give them a means to go toe-to-toe against Imperial Star Destroyers. The Imperial response to this rebellion began to grow more and more feeble. They cracked down on worlds across the galaxy, even on worlds where rebellion had not directly taken root, and they perpetuated criminal acts which made the reconquest of the Rim seem tame. These hardline measures were not nearly as effective as Palpatine hoped. Indeed, the harder the Empire cracked down, the more worlds threw their support behind the Alliance, and their network grew even despite deciding to pursue a stateless strategy. The Alliance gained key personnel in the likes of war heroes like Jan Dodonna, and their strategy began to become more refined as a result, based around those same hit-and-run strikes that could cripple key Imperial targets while allowing the rebels to fade away before the Empire could respond. The rebellion would win a large victory by the end of 1 BBY, but this victory did not come about because of military action. Indeed, it was more a result of Palpatine's mistakes. The Empire had the habit of nationalizing companies in order to gain full control of their assets, a process which we talked about again in the imperialization video, and I hope I remember to link it in the description. But Palpatine would order the nationalization of the Incom Corporation, much the same as he did with Kuat Drive Yards. Incom was a producer of starfighters, and many of the employees of Incom did not take the news that they were suddenly government employees well, so they threw their lot in with the rebellion. They informed the rebels about a prototype strike fighter that was being developed on Frezia, one which could potentially shift the tide of the war. A mission was planned with a dual-pronged strike launched against the planets of Wayland and Kuat in order to draw Imperial forces away from Frezia. A raid was then launched, with the rebellion seizing the 4 prototype strike fighters. This strike fighter was the T-65 X-Wing, and it seemed purpose-built for the rebellion's overall strategy. It was shielded, had a hyperdrive, and was capable of holding its own against the Empire's superior numbers. The X-Wing fundamentally altered the rebellion's power base and, combined with their use of the Mon Calamari cruisers, gave them the means to truly go toe-to-toe with the Imperial war machine. The Alliance would follow up on the success of the raid on Frezia by using the X-Wing to win the Battle of Turkana, which would force the Empire to respond with their own counterattack in the form of Operation Strike Fear. Operation Strike Fear sent a task force deep into the Tion cluster in order to subdue the entire region. The rebels managed to put up a good fight, and this entire operation turned from an overwhelming show of force designed to break the rebels' spirit to a slog, which began to drain Imperial resources and showed the galaxy that the Empire could indeed be fought military to military. The strategic failure of Operation Strike Fear was followed soon after by the Sullustan resistance successfully throwing off the Imperial-backed government of the planet. The Empire responded to this, but of course so did the rebels, which created strong ties between the Alliance and Sullust, giving the rebellion yet another major ship manufacturer to back their war effort. The Empire's strategy for trying to negate these successes on behalf of the rebellion was an increase in terror and retaliation against civilian populations. This doctrine was even put into official governmental effect under the name of the Tarkin Doctrine, after Grand Moff Wilf Tarkin, the chief proponent of using fear to cement rule. Under his view, the galaxy was too large to police effectively, even with the massive Imperial fleet, and Palpatine agreed that in order to counter the rebellion's stateless strategy, you had to break the spirit of the galaxy's populace. He hoped to make them understand that resistance was futile in all respects, and as such, he poured money into his superweapons programs. The Death Star project, which had already been underway for decades, finally reached completion in 0 BBY at the height of the Galactic Civil War. Palpatine used its conception as an excuse to finally abolish the Imperial Senate, handing down all power directly to the Moff Council. Grand Moff Tarkin would then order the first official test of the Death Star's super laser, annihilating the planet of Alderaan, killing Bail Organa, and striking a major blow against the rebellion's leadership in the process. Of course, the Death Star and other projects like it were massive undertakings, and hiding something like that, involving tens of thousands, if not millions of workers spread across the galaxy, is next to impossible. Word reached the rebellion via rumor and conjecture, and this, combined with data that they garnered themselves during a few battles, pointed to the Death Star's existence. The rebellion, they knew that a superweapon of that magnitude could spell an end to their fight against tyranny, so they launched a massive, multi-pronged operation to acquire the plans to this battle station. This operation was called Operation Skyhook, and it took place across the galaxy in half a dozen skirmishes and battles. The Empire had split the plans up, hoping to maintain confidentiality around the project through compartmentalization, so the rebellion, in order to discover these plans, had to rely on a network of spies, mercenaries, and special forces. Eventually, though, Operation Skyhook would be a success, and the rebellion would finally manage to obtain a complete set of the Death Star's plans at the Battle of Top Rawa. The plans would be transmitted during that battle to the starship of Princess Leia Organa, the daughter of Bail, and ostensibly a senator in the Imperial Senate. Darth Vader, however, could have cared less about her political status, and he gave chase to the princess. Eventually, he would overtake her vessel, the Tantive 4, in the skies above Tatooine, though he would be unable to obtain the plans to the Death Star. These plans would be given to a pair of droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO, who had managed to escape to the surface of the planet. Vader and Tarkin's attempt to extract information from the princess is what would eventually lead to the destruction of Alderaan, which, as I mentioned, was also the first full-scale test of the Death Star's laser. Tarkin hoped that the display would cow the rest of the galaxy, cutting the rebellion off from their base of support and allowing the Empire to clean the rebels up at their leisure. The Grand Moff would follow up the destruction of one of the Republic's founding planets by ordering the Death Star to the Yavin system. Tarkin and Vader had managed to obtain the location of a rebel base there by allowing Princess Leia to be rescued by Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, placing a tracker on her ship during the process and then following them to the fourth moon of the massive Red Giant system. The battle in the skies above Yavin was perhaps one of the most crucial hinge moments in all of galactic history. If the Empire won, the rebellion would have lost almost all of its high command and would have likely been scattered shortly afterwards. However, the rebels did not allow the fact that they were staring into oblivion to stop them. They launched a desperate starfighter assault against the battle station, hoping that the small strike craft would be able to penetrate the Death Star's defenses and strike at the one weak point that the rebels were able to locate by analyzing the stolen plans, an exhaust port only a few meters across. The Rebel Alliance would take high levels of casualties in the assault, but Luke Skywalker would manage to pull off the fateful shot that destroyed the Death Star, killing Grand Moff Tarkin and delivering the worst military defeat that the Empire had ever experienced. This moment was so crucial to the course of history in the galaxy that it would become the divider used to create the datum system that is still used in the galaxy today. Everything happened before the Battle of Yavin was marked BBY, before the Battle of Yavin, and everything that happened after was marked ABY, after the Battle of Yavin. This crushing defeat turned the destruction of Alderaan from a dire warning into a clarion call. The galaxy had now seen that the Empire could be defeated even at their most powerful, and many of the common citizens across the stars had become more than fed up with oppressive Imperial policies. The Rebel Alliance had finally become a legitimate military threat to the Galactic Empire, and as such, many worlds once more openly declared for rebellion. However, the Empire's response was severe and swift. The Imperial fleet immediately blockaded Yavin 4, trapping much of the rebellion there, though most of the High Command was able to leave in the wake of the Death Star's destruction. The Imperials also stepped up their strategy of terror in order to suppress resistance. They released the Kandorian Plague in the world of Dental, and they launched multiple strikes into the Tian hegemony to crush that area of space. The Alliance had won a crushing victory, but the war was far from over, and the Imperial fleet and military was still one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The Empire would launch a full galactic-wide counteroffensive at the beginning of 1 ABY as Darth Vader's flagship, the Executor, the new class of ship that would become known as a Super Star Destroyer, was completed. The Imperials would storm Yavin 4 during this offensive in a bloody attack, which saw them finally take the world from the rebellion. They would also defeat the rebels at Ratha, and they would catch the rebel fleet at a point that was known as Tingle Deep Space Besh. At Tingle Deep Space Besh, the rebels would find themselves completely surrounded, and they would almost be completely wiped out. Survivors only escaped by jumping to random hyperspace vectors, and the Alliance was considered almost entirely lost. It would have been the end of the rebellion, but the Bothans under Borsk Fela joined the cause openly, buoyed by the destruction of the Death Star at Yavin. The Mon Calamari would also save the rebellion yet again, committing almost the entirety of their home defense fleet to the cause of the Alliance. However, on top of the military defeats that the rebellion suffered in the wake of the Death Star's destruction, the loss of Bail Organa had an extremely destabilizing effect. Bail had acted as a mediator between Belibis and Mothma, and without him, the two were almost constantly at odds. Belibis believed Mon Mothma wanted only personal power, and that she intended to declare herself Empress once Palpatine was defeated, but Mothma, for her part, excused Belibis from the rebellion. She said that his forces were no longer needed, and Belibis and the Corellian resistance would break away, carrying on the fight on their own, but as an entirely separate entity. The rebels, they needed heavily reorganized, and Mon Mothma and Akbar would step up to the plate. Both of them believed that the Alliance needed to grow beyond their reliance on hit-and-run starfighter attacks, but they also believed that it was still ultimately foolish for the rebellion to start seizing territory. They would reorganize the Alliance into a fleet system which kept the rebellion grouped around self-sufficient battle groups that were able to operate and move about the galaxy on their own. Admiral Akbar would be named Supreme Commander of Alliance forces, and his belief was that capital ships were ultimately needed in order to carry the day. The Alliance fleet began to move from place to place, slowly growing its strength in numbers by helping people locally or asking for their help off the table. People knew that the rebellion was out there, somewhere, fighting back, and this was enough to have a psychological effect on the people of the galaxy. It prevented Palpatine from establishing total dominion on many worlds, and the rebellion would eventually establish a new hidden HQ on the ice world of Hoth, far out in the Outer Rim, though Alliance Command realized that it was always going to be a temporary refuge, with the base always kept on high alert and ready to evacuate. This interim period of conflict and skirmish, with the Imperials really pushing the front, would come to an end into the ABY. Darth Vader's new flagship, the Executor, had proved a massive boon to the war effort, and several more Superstar Destroyers were ordered. While they were being constructed, Vader was tasked with tracking down and ending the rebellion personally, and he created a task force which would be known as Death Squadron to achieve this goal. Death Squadron was composed of the Executor and 5 other Imperial Star Destroyers, more than enough to conquer almost any system. He also had the authority to retask any other Imperial asset as needed, effectively giving Darth Vader functional command over the Imperial military. Darth Vader would launch his effort by taking Death Squadron down the Trialius trade route. It was a plan that was actually developed by Grand Admiral Thrawn, one of the few aliens to rise to a level of prominence in the Empire. Grand Admiral Thrawn realized that the rebellion was almost wholly dependent on smuggling and criminal networks to supply themselves, and thus he suggested that Death Squadron focus on destroying smuggling bases, capturing pirates, and routing the criminal element. The idea was to run the rebels to ground and remove their allies with the same stroke, hopefully turning up intelligence as to where the rebel base was located. This plan would prove extremely effective, with the Imperials slowly gathering more and more intelligence as they cleared out the criminal element and cut off the rebels' only access to supplies. The Battle of Dara 4 would take place at the end of 2 ABY, with Suntir Fel and his 181st TIE Fighter Group decisively defeating the rebel Renegade Squadron. This would really put the rebellion on the back foot, and the Alliance High Command would come to the realization that the noose was slowly tightening around Hoth. They were under extreme pressure by the dawn of 3 ABY, with their supply lines in tatters, and with their hidden HQ on the verge of discovery. Many smugglers were even forced to work for the Empire, which proved to be an absolute disaster since many of them knew the rebels' inner nature a bit more intricately. The 181st and Death Squadron had managed to decisively defeat several major rebellion bases, each victory bringing them more information to narrow down the location of Hoth. Admiral Akbar was forced to keep the rebel fleet completely on the move and in a separate part of the galaxy. They just couldn't risk being caught all in one place. Finally, this would prove to be wise, as Imperial efforts would bear fruit with the discovery of Hoth itself. Death Squadron would retask 4 Star Destroyers from the Juris sector, bringing the battle group to a total of 9 Imperial Star Destroyers backed by the Executor. This was an assault force which outclassed pretty much anything that the rebels had to bear, even the full might of their main fleet. Darth Vader would launch this attack as soon as the battle group was assembled, but the attack on Echo Base did not go exactly to plan. Admiral Kendall Ozzel was the admiral underneath Darth Vader, who directly commanded Death Squadron at the time, but he made a mistake, and he brought the ships out of hyperspace far too close to the system, alerting the rebellion of the attack and allowing them to power on their planetary shields. This forced the Empire to land an assault force to destroy the shield generator, rather than just allowing them to bombard them into oblivion from orbit. The rebellion ordered a full evacuation, which they had been prepared for some time, and set up defensive positions with the intent of delaying the Empire long enough for Rebel command to escape. A pitched battle would ensue, and the Rebels suffered heavy casualties. But the delay tactic worked. Rebel High Command was able to escape the planet, and they would regroup with the Rebel fleet at prearranged coordinates outside the galactic plane. This really put the rebellion on the back foot. They had suffered an extremely bad year, and yet despite the setbacks, there were still some successes. The Empire had many secret superweapon projects, as mentioned, and one of these was known as the Tarkin, a stripped-down superlaser which was capable of destroying planets. The Rebels would manage to discover and destroy the Tarkin before it saw widespread replication. There were also several other smaller strikes, but despite these isolated wins, it seemed that the momentum of the Empire could not be stopped. The TIE Phantom was approved for mass production, and this was a series of TIE Fighter which had increased performance and even the ability for them to cloak. It was also during this time that Palpatine pushed to open up new areas of the galaxy, most especially the Deep Core, where he began to build his fortress world at Biss and lay the foundations for the final phase of his master plan. But that's something we're going to go more in depth about in a future video. Grand Admiral Thrawn was dispatched to the unknown regions during this time with orders to establish an area of Imperial influence there, and the Chiss Admiral would build the Empire of the Hand under this direction. The Empire of the Hand was a fusion of Imperial and Chiss technology and culture, but again, we'll talk about them more in depth later down the road. The end of 3 ABY was indeed a dark time for the Rebellion, but it was also a time of heroes. Rogue Squadron in particular helped keep them alive. They launched daring mission after daring mission, their exploits not only giving the Rebels precious breathing room, but also serving to bolster morale and showing the rest of the people of the galaxy that the fight wasn't done yet. Despite this, they were still struggling to regroup when the Rebellion received intelligence that the Emperor was building his second Death Star. This colossal space station was an existential threat to the Rebellion, even in its current unfinished state. But even with that, the Rebels weren't quite sure if they should risk resources to take it out. It was not until they learned that Palpatine himself would be personally present to oversee the construction that the decision was made by Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar that it was worth the risk. An attack by the entire Rebel fleet was launched, and it nearly ended in complete disaster. The Rebels sent an infantry strike team ahead of the main fleet to land on Endor and destroy the planetary base shield generator that was protecting the still under construction space station. The fleet arrived the next day in what was supposed to be a coordinated strike that would end the Empire for good. Instead, Admiral Akbar found a large portion of the Imperial Navy waiting for them, and the 501st Storm Legion, Darth Vader's personal forces, was waiting on the Forest Moon for the strike force. It was a trap, and even worse, the Death Star was operational and proved capable of targeting capital ships. The intelligence about the Death Star had been purposefully leaked by Darth Sidious in order to lure the rebellion to their final destruction. It was only through the actions of Darth Vader, who betrayed Emperor Palpatine to save his son Luke Skywalker, that utter defeat was avoided. The strike team on the Forest Moon was able to change the battle around against all odds, successfully destroying the shield generator, and with the death of the Emperor, the Imperial Navy fell into disarray after Darth Sidious's battle meditation broke, giving the rebels a chance to actually destroy the massive station. The Emperor and his chief lieutenant Darth Vader were dead. Now, the Empire had been constructed from the bottom up to be only able to function so long as Palpatine was in power, which meant that everything immediately collapsed into chaos. Now, this takes us through a portion of history in Star Wars that most people are probably familiar with, but this was not the end of the Galactic Civil War. This video is already getting very long, and I think I'm going to have to turn what happens next into its own tale. But we'll pick that all up in the next video. Now that I'm back doing this again, we'll follow the rebellion after their victory at Endor, and then we'll cover the beginnings of their transformation from a ragtag band of freedom fighters to a galaxy-spanning New Republic. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a long one, I know. It took me a long time to make it, and the truth is, this is only really a general summary. I barely scratched the surface, and there's probably more detailed accounts of the Galactic Civil War out there. You should check out Mandalore's channel. If you haven't, he has a similar video that probably covered some stuff that I missed. If you made it this far, though, please like and subscribe. It really helps out. I'll see you guys next time. Take care of yourselves out there, and as always, may the Force break your chains.